My name is Dr. Stella Volpe, and I'm professor and chair of the Department of Nutrition Sciences at Drexel University. And today I'm going to talk to you about how to eat to optimize your exercise performance. I'd like to start with a couple of quotes from the American Dietetic Association, also now known as the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. They state that physical activity, athletic performance, and recovery from exercise are enhanced by optimal nutrition. And as I tell most athletes, I tell every athlete that eating is an equal part of your exercise regimen, as is the exercise part, whether you're a competitive athlete or not a competitive athlete. And secondly, adequate food and fluid should be consumed before, during, and after exercise to help maintain blood glucose, that is your blood sugar levels, during exercise. And that helps to maximize exercise performance and your recovery time. So, in other words, you have to eat enough to get into exercise with those enough glucose in your blood and glycogen or stored forms of glucose in your muscles and liver so that you're not going into exercise in a deficit. So, what is this thing called sports nutrition? Just basically, sports nutrition is a study of nutrition as it relates to athletic performance or exercise performance. Again, I'm not simply talking to athletes here, I'm talking to people of all levels of exercise. And basically, two things formulate sports nutrition, that is, the quality, amount, and types of food and hydration that affects performance. And secondly, there are supplements that act as ergogenic aids, also known as performance enhancing aids. I won't be discussing ergogenic aids in this short presentation. However, to note, there are very, very few supplements that actually can help exercise performance. So what can be optimal nutrition for athletic performance? Well, to consume the right amount of calories and nutrients is really important. In particular, we see that a lot of female athletes don't consume enough energy or calories. And then to promote optimal recovery from any type of training that you might have, to maintain your hydration status, and then also to maintain your appropriate body composition. That is, we want to make sure that we gain muscle and we lose fat, but that we maintain the appropriate body weight and body composition, not too low of a percent body fat, but then an optimal percent body fat for the exercise that we're doing. So the first thing that I'll talk about is energy. And we as nutritionists call it energy, but we know it is calories, the same thing. But the energy that you would need is based on four main things that we call basically the FIT principle. So it's the frequency of how often you exercise each week and each day, the intensity in which you exercise, the type of exercise, and the time, or as I have here, the duration of exercise. So all four of these will encompass how many calories that you'll need to consume each day. And therefore, it's varied per person, and it's also varied based on your height, your age, your gender, and your body weight. So three main things that all of us know about are macronutrients. And those macronutrients are carbohydrates, fat, and protein. They are all necessary for optimal performance, and the timing of consuming these is also very important, pre-exercise and post-exercise. So how much carbohydrates do we need? Well, based on the dietary reference intakes for the United States, a minimum of 130 grams of carbohydrates per day. If you multiply that by 4, because there are 4 calories per gram in carbohydrates, that gives us almost about 500 to 600 calories a day per person required from carbohydrates. And the best sources of carbohydrates are from complex carbohydrates like whole grain breads, pasta, rice, and even with fruits, they provide us with carbohydrates, even though that they are a more simple form of carbohydrates. The recommended percent of total calories that we should consume are about 45 to 65% of our total calories for a healthy person as far as how much carbohydrates they should consume. So, for example, if a person requires 2,000 calories, 50% of that is going to be about 600 calories a day that come from carbohydrates. 50% of, yeah, I think I calculated that right. As far as protein is concerned, the dietary reference intake state that we need 0.8 grams per kilogram of protein per body weight. Now, that comes to about 0.45 grams per pound. So in essence, if you think of your body weight, let's just say you weigh 150 pounds, you need about 75 grams of protein per day. And what is a gram of protein? If you think of, for example, a piece of chicken, a 2-ounce piece of chicken provides us with about 7 grams of protein. And you can also think of it as a percentage of your total calories. So 10 to 35% of total calorie intake is what you might be required. Athletes need a higher amount of protein from 1 to 1.7 grams per kilogram, or again, about 0.5 to maybe about 0.8 grams per pound. As far as fat, a lot of people think that fat is the bad guy. And fat actually is extremely important for athletes and non-athletes alike. So in general, we want to consume about 25 to 35% of our total calories from fat. And these should come mostly from monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. So things like olive oil, almonds, avocados, walnuts, those are great sources of mono and polyunsaturated fats. And the more we eat of those better fats, the better they are for our overall health, in particular for the decreased risk of chronic disease. There are no dietary reference intakes for things like saturated fats, which are very sort of high in the news, as are trans fatty acids or cholesterol. However, if you consume the better types of fats, you're likely not going to consume too many of these types of fats. So let's talk a little bit about pre-exercise nutrition needs. So as far as those athletes who are endurance athletes, athletes who might run 5 or more miles a day, for example, or strength athletes, those who may lift weights seriously about 3 or 4 times per week, the carbohydrates that they need should be about 200 to 300 grams of carbohydrates, or 800 to 1200 calories of carbohydrates about 3 to 4 hours prior to their event. And having more carbohydrates prior to an exercise event, or in particular if it's a competition, is important because what that does is it allows you to put more glycogen, i.e., the storage form of carbohydrates, into the muscles and into your liver so that you can use them during that activity. The longer that activity goes, the more carbohydrates you tend to need. So in this case, for example, the 300 grams would go more toward that marathoner, and the 200 grams prior to the event would go more toward that strength athlete. Protein and fat are also really important prior to exercise. For protein, let's go back again to around that 1 gram per kilogram of body weight, or 0.5 grams per pound, about 3 to 4 hours prior to an event. In a couple of slides from now, I'll give you some examples of actual foods that you can have prior to an event. If, however, you are doing, on a daily basis, you're going to the gym and exercising about 30 minutes per day, this amount of calories prior to exercising is not needed. So this amount of calories is needed more for the individual who actually is competing. As far as fat is concerned, prior to an event, we do not want to consume too much fat. But if we do consume fat, something like peanut butter with, on a bagel, peanut butter and jelly on a bagel would be a really good thing to have 3 to 4 hours prior to an event. If a person's on a team sport, and some of you might be on a team sport now, you might have children who are on team sports, the recommendations are slightly different. So for example, for carbohydrates, it's from 1 to 4.5 grams per kilogram of body weight, 1 to 4 hours pre-competition. So again, we're talking about 600 to 800 calories prior to competition. And then for protein, 1 gram per kilogram of body weight, 3 to 4 hours prior to the event again. So the same thing as endurance and strength athletes. And again, for fat, following the recommendations for the day, but the fat intake should be pretty low. Something else I'm going to state here that I don't have on my slides is that you want to ensure that prior to events, so closer to an athletic event or a competition, you don't want to eat a lot of fiber. Fiber is really great for us, but we don't want any GI upset, which can be caused by too much fiber. And another thing is again, if you're on a team sport where maybe the competition isn't as high, then you don't necessarily need this much carbohydrate or this much protein prior to perhaps your event. And again, if you're playing, say, pickup games in a men's or women's league, for example, at once a week, certainly this amount of calories prior to that event is not required. So you can bring these calories down sort of parallel to how many calories you're expending. And a very good way to know if you're doing okay is to maybe weigh yourself once a week. I'm not a big fan of weighing yourself every day, but if you weigh yourself once a week in the morning after you've voided without clothes on, that can give you an idea that your weight is being fairly stable. So here are some examples of pre-exercise meals and snacks. Peanut butter and or peanut butter and jelly on whole wheat toast, fruit and yogurt smoothie with granola, turkey and Swiss cheese sandwich with maybe a piece of fruit, and or a tuna sandwich with some fruit and yogurt on the side. So these are very simple meals, and these can also be very simple snacks. And again, whether or not you're competitive, but if maybe you're not competitive, but you exercise very intensely every day of the week or most days of the week, these snacks are important even if you're not competing. So to think about maintaining your glycogen stores, your stores of carbohydrate within your muscles and liver is really important so that you don't feel fatigued the next time you go and exercise. In addition, closer to the activity, a sports drink or sports bar plus water or sports gels or beans plus water are really good to have. So, for example, I exercise every day pretty intensely, and then when I get up in the morning, I can't eat very much. So I tend to have some my sports gels or beans with either some water or a sports drink as well. And then afterwards, I will have my bigger breakfast. But for those of you who exercise in the morning and can't eat very much, those little gels or those honey stinger gels or Gatorade chews, for example, they do very well for you if you can't eat a lot in the morning, so that you can get something in your stomach to allow you not to go into exercise in a quote unquote starvation mode. And some of you might have that question. People ask me, is it better if I exercise after like an overnight fast, after sleeping without eating? Will I lose more weight, for example? And really that's not very preferable, because you're going to start using your muscle for energy first before you use your fat. Unfortunately, that's what our body does. It protects our fat, because if it feels like it's going to be starving, even if you're not starving yourself, then your body wants to say, well, let's hold on to this fat so that I can have it to protect that person later. So what about during exercise? Again, maybe if you're competing and during exercise, for endurance, strength, and team sport athletes, carbohydrates at 30 to 60 grams per hour is needed. So that's not as much as you may think. It might be having a fig Newton if you're riding a bike, or drinking at sports drinks, or maybe having a banana about every hour. But that's more, again, for endurance sports or team sports who actually go on for more than an hour. Protein and fat during these times, we don't want too much of them for these events. And hydration is really important. Some people take this a bit overboard, however. Some people drink about a gallon of water every day. And it is important to maintain hydration, but I'll tell you some ways that you'll know if you're well hydrated or not. So quickly, just to go through this slide, is if you lose more than 2% of your body weight, that can impair your exercise performance. We don't want that. We don't want to go up to any more than 1% dehydration. It would be better if we didn't get dehydrated at all, but most athletes tend to be about 0.5 to 1% dehydrated after an event, because they're not drinking quite enough, but they've consumed enough water. Again, ideal, no dehydration, but you definitely don't want to get above 1% dehydration, because not only can you impair performance, but then if it gets worse, you can get into heat exhaustion and then heat stroke. So ways that you can stay hydrated are consume 16 ounces of water or sports drinks about 2 hours pre-exercise. And then during exercise, you can drink about every 10 to 15 minutes of water or sports drink. If you exercise more than an hour or more rather, then a sports drink is really preferable. But if you exercise less than that, water is just fine. And how can you tell if you're well hydrated? It's very easy. There are a few ways. One is to look at the color of your urine. If your urine is a pale yellow color, you're doing just fine. If it's clear, you're overhydrating, and if it's too dark, you're likely underhydrating. Also, if you're feeling thirsty a lot, then you know during the day that likely you're going to need some more hydration. Again, think about that. Think about the fact that you don't want to really get too thirsty, so you might want to sip on water throughout the day, but you don't necessarily need gallons of water. And then finally, you can weigh yourself pre and post exercise. And again, if you've lost more than a pound of water, then you're dehydrated a bit. And if you've gained some weight, you've overhydrated during exercise. So it's paying attention to those kinds of cues, and they're very, very easy to pay attention to, is to know where you stand when it comes to hydration. And to rehydrate, you want to consume about 16 to 24 ounces of water for every pound of body weight loss. And you can follow a personalized fluid replacement plan, but I would base it on, again, I think looking at your urine color is the easiest thing to do. And because you obviously we go to the bathroom more than once a day, so you can kind of get an idea. Is it clear, or is it pale yellow, or is it too dark? And you're going to know if you're dehydrated, because dark urine is very obvious when it comes to somebody being dehydrated. And I really wanted to put this slide up here because general healthy eating is a key for all of us. And two great resources that our tax dollars pay for are the ChooseMyPlate.gov as well as the U.S. Dietary Guidelines for Americans. The last U.S. Dietary Guidelines for Americans came out in 2010, but the newer ones were supposed to have come out in 2015, but I think it'll be more like 2016. But you can go to ChooseMyPlate.gov, and even though they don't have an app yet, you can enter your dietary intake, and it will tell you a good plan for yourself, and it'll also tell you if you're overdoing it or underdoing it in certain nutrients, as well as even in your caloric intake. And I'd like to end my presentation just to sort of give a little plug for our Drexel Center for Integrated Nutrition and Performance. That's directed by one of our faculty, Professor Nairee Dardarian. And basically the mission of this is to provide evidence-based nutritional advice to the entire Drexel community for maintenance and or improvement of overall health and well-being. And our principles are lifelong health, respect for each individual's needs, and for athletic and cognitive performance. But we have a lot of services. We have services to sports teams. We have services to all our faculty and staff. We have counseling, nutrition counseling services that are provided to all of Drexel University faculty, staff, and students. And it's something to take advantage of. And if your department, for example, wants a nutrition talk, one of our faculty or one of our wonderful graduate students or interns can come and give a talk about nutrition to either your department or a group of people who may like to have a talk given to. So I thank you so much for your attention. It was an honor to be able to talk with you about this, and it's nice to be able to talk to and reach out to some of our